Short seasons are killing TV. And the reason why I am making such a bold claim is because of 5 things. 1, they limit the character arc and growth we get to experience. 2, they hobble the plot. 3, they choke the pacing. 4, they restrict experimentation. And 5, they affect the bottom line of the actors and crew. Because yes, when I say shorter seasons are killing TV, I am referring to TV as both a medium of storytelling and also referring to the people who work within the industry to bring said stories to our screens. If you'd like to hear me expand more on these 5 factors I've just listed, keep watching. Now, I'm going to come right off the bat and express my bias so we have all our cards on the table. I'm a fan of old shows. I love them. I love my reruns. I'm currently doing my yearly rewatch of the old Star Trek shows. TNG will always be my favorite. Just putting it out there. So the old episodic shows of 20-something episodes are my bread and butter. They are my comfort place. I would like to state it outright because I do know that this preference is most likely coloring my take on things. But at the same time, I do hope I make a compelling enough argument that after you're done watching this video, you get a better understanding on why I'm taking this stance. And if you agree or disagree with me, please let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe and share this video as well. Oh, and if you want to and can afford to, I do have a Patreon if you'd like to support my content. But with that said, let's talk numbers. Specifically, the average number of episodes per season that viewers have been getting and how it's been steadily declining since 2018. Because no, it's not all in your head. Parrot Analytics took a sample of US-based shows across both network TV and streaming platforms from 2018 to 2023. And the data shows that we went from 15.4 episodes per season on network TV and 11.1 episodes per season for streaming services to 10.2 episodes per season for network TV and 9.6 for streaming shows. I will of course leave links to the site in the description box so you can read up on the article yourself. But it does take things a step further by pointing out that the percentage of shows that released with 20 plus episodes dropped from 19% in 2018 all the way down to 4.5% in 2023. Now, if the numbers are to be believed, then it means that networks are actively pushing a narrative that the modern audience is not interested in longer shows. That what we want are shorter, more concise seasons, right? Because that's the only logical conclusion we can arrive at, right? Corporations are all about making money after all, and what we're told is that they focus on what the audience needs so they can meet said need. That's how they make a profit, right? I mean, why else would they reduce the number of the episodes we get if that's not what their audience wants, right? But if there's anything we've learned across various industries, whether you love video games or movies or TV shows or books, it's that the people in suits in corporate are often far removed from what their audience actually wants. Instead, they are driven by what I personally think is a God complex. This desire and belief that they get to determine what we should want and like. That they are the arbiters of good taste, and so they get to force their desires onto us. But that's a topic for another day, and not the reason why you clicked on this video. No, we're talking about the ways that shorter seasons are killing television. Starting with the most obvious. Shorter seasons limit character arc and growth. On November 9th, 2024, the second season of Arcane dropped. Now, if you loved season 1 like a lot of us did, you were probably excitedly counting down the days, the hours to when season 2 episode 1 would drop. After all, last time we left things off, Jinx had once again gone off the rockers and attacked the council, leading to the death and the maiming of quite a number of them, just as they were voting to grant Zon independence. Jinx's story has always centered the comedy of errors that is her actions, creating situations that make things so much worse for her world because, just as with any good story and the proper use of dramatic irony, we, the audience, know more than she does. And so we are aware of just how much she's about to screw things over royally. But the stage was set. Tempers were ready to escalate and boil with everyone caught in the aftermath. And we're all ready for a ride because what's most important to keep in mind about Arcane is that it is a show that is essentially a character study. Sure, we have the themes of oppression and the ethical study in science and the fear of repeating past mistakes and endangering those we love, but at the core of it all, Arcane is a show that is about its characters. Which, when you think about it, makes sense because Arcane is a show based off of the characters in the League of Legends. These pre-established characters matter, and getting them to the point that they are within the game was clearly important to the writers and showrunners of Arcane. It is a promotion for the game after all. But that is where I see the same mishap that happened with the last season of Game of Thrones come in. Now, you're probably wondering what on earth is the connection, and are now convinced that I am talking out of my ass. But walk with me a minute here. The one thing that a lot of people who really disliked the ending of Game of Thrones, of which I am one of them, is the fact that it felt rushed. Now, there is a lot to be said about the interpretation that D&D gave the character of Daenerys Targaryen. But let's say that that's what they wanted. That they wanted to explore the Mad Queen trope with her characterization. I might not agree with it, but let's say that that's what they were going for. The reason why they got a lot of pushback and objections was that it didn't feel earned. That Daenerys' turn to madness happened way too quickly. And it is at that point that they lost a lot of the audience. Not just those of us who were invested in her story and liked her character, but everyone else who wanted to see how Game of Thrones would end. Finally, after 8 seasons. Season 8 being the point where all of this was to be explored. Daenerys' story, Cersei's story, Jaime's story, the Stark children's stories, Jon's story. The fact that all of this was meant to be wrapped up in season 8, and that season got not 12, not 15 episodes, but a measly 6, meant that even if the show was to dedicate 1 episode to each character, there wasn't enough episodes to fully do them all justice. We never got the chance to see the arcs of all these characters come full circle in a way that felt earned and has depth. Because to do that, we need time. Time that we don't get with shorter episodes. Paranormal writer Jamie Gold has this to say about character arcs with depth and how to ensure that it is done right. Deep, positive acts tend to include more character emotions than other types of arc, or than shallower positive acts, as they feature elements like backstory wounds, self-sabotaging choices, false beliefs, ingrained fear, emotional armor, etc. The transformation that a character goes through as part of that arc involves hard changes that require vulnerability and new mindsets and digging into their fears. So no, I don't think a ringing of bells is enough to signify Daenerys' dark turn like D&D were going for in the episode. It was instead a shortcut that was exploited because they didn't have enough room to fully dive into Daenerys' psyche in a believable way and within a believable time period. Something that we can lay firmly at the feet of the 6-episode limit we got for Game of Thrones Season 8. And we see something similar happen with Arcane Season 2. Now, you might be wondering why I'm bringing that up, considering both Season 1 and 2 had an equal number of episodes. Well, it's because Arcane's first season was introductory. It served a core purpose to get us acquainted with these characters, establish their motivations, give us a clue as to what their points of conflict may be, i.e., Vi and Silco's motivations and agenda are both centered on Powder Jinx, but their conflict is tied to them wanting different things from and for her, with the hope that she follows their preferred ideology. Echo is trying to live up to the legacy of his adopted father and Vonda in how he looks out for those in Zon who need protection and shelter from Silco's push of shine to cement his control. Jace and Victor are driven by their need to have their science mean something for the people of Piltover in Jace's case, while Victor wanted to be able to help his people in Zon. And of course, there's Mel wanting to secure her power and prove to her family that she's worthy of the Murdada name. All of these characters are different and desirous of different things. The end of Season 1 puts all their plans in a state of flux and chaos brought on by Jinx's actions. To fully explore these race themes and desires, however, all the while staying true to the core of what Arcane is, i.e., its focus on its characters, and how ultimately said goals and desires change them over the course of the story, is something that, like with Game of Thrones, requires time. Because Season 2 wraps up the story of Piltover. Like, sure, we're going with Mel to Noxus, but we're leaving everyone in Piltover. The world of League of Legends is vast, and the characters all have such depth that it would be a dream for a writing team to sink their teeth into the various worlds and cities that are present within the game's lore. And so after spending the first season introducing us to these characters and realizing that the second season has to bring these characters to the point they should be in within the world of the game, it was quite the choice for the showrunners and the studio to decide to keep the 9-episode format for Season 2 as well. Because when people complain about how Vi, for example, lost her identity and seemed wishy-washy with her desires, going every which way in every episode, you see that is because, in the words of Jamie Gold earlier stated, the writer decided to go with a shallower positive arc for these characters. Because for deep character arcs, you need time to fully explore these characters to get them to the depth of what makes them tick, to slowly bring them to the point of change. If Walter White had become Heisenberg in the first season of Breaking Bad, we lose the slow degrading of the character and his morals, which is a central theme of his characterization, and how he progresses or regresses, depending on what side of the divide you're sitting from being an ordinary chemistry teacher to the ruthless drug kingpin that we end the show with. The reason why Breaking Bad was very satisfying is that we literally got to walk step by step with Walter as he went through the transformation. We saw the little choices he made to get to that point. So that by the time we see him actively choose to watch Jane die so he can retain control over Jesse, we realize that it's just about cross the point of no return. That was the true start of his change for me personally. And that was only Season 2, Episode 5. The changes took time. Breaking Bad's first season, where we get introduced to the characters, was 7 episodes. They bumped it to 13 in Seasons 2 through 4. And then for its final season, they pushed it to 16 episodes. So the writers can give us a satisfying finale that felt earned and wrapped up all the characters' stories in a satisfactory way. I don't mean to belabor the point, but when we're talking about shorter seasons and how they're killing TV, it needs to be said. TV shows are driven, mostly propelled by their characters. Movies with their shorter format of a couple of hours of total runtime can often be solely focused on the plot. Yes, some movies are character studies, but some of them are just driven by the happenings of the plot, and that is okay. TV shows, however, are held, carried, and pushed forward by their characters. They are what keep us coming back season after season to see what they're up to, what their state is, and how the story will drive them even further. And for that to happen, the seasons need to be a bit longer. Instead, we get shorter ones and characters that ultimately suffer for it. But not only characters suffer, the plot does too. And when I'm speaking on the plot, I am both referring to the overarching plot of the story being told through the show and also the overarching plot for the season in view. What do I mean by that? Let's look at yet another recent show that has joined the shorter seasons club, House of the Dragon. Based off of the prequel novel Fire and Blood by famed writer George R.R. Martin, long may he live, so we can finally get Winds of Winter. And please, don't come for me in my Delulu state. Leave me to my delusions, please. I have been waiting almost 15 years since I was all caught up with the series. Let me have this small smidgen, kernel of hope. Who knows? George might surprise us. But as I was saying, House of the Dragon is an adaptation of Fire and Blood. Specifically, the chapters of the book that span the reigns of Jaehaerys I to most likely the beginning of Aegon's III. I say most likely because if you've read the book or paid attention to Joffrey's boasting to Margaery Tyrell, or if you've been in spaces where fandom spoilers abound, then you know exactly how the Dance of the Dragons ended. Spoiler alert, not good for anyone. And so we have an idea of where they want to stop House of the Dragon. But I, like most people, I'm a big fan of Targaryen history and lore. And I love the politicking that George explores to such a delightful, I want to gobble it all up degree. That is the push and pull and furthering of various centered interests that was at the heart of the Dance of the Dragons, with people voluntary and for others being forced to choose between the blacks or the greens. Getting to see this depicted on screen was one of my many, many dreams, and I was sat ready to be entertained by the time the first season dropped. Now, do I take objection to certain decisions made in season 1? Yes. For example, I still do not understand why they wanted to make Alicent Rhaenyra's bestie so desperately when in the books she's much older and desperate for power, i.e., a lot of her decisions in the book were conscious choices she made because she wanted to consolidate power for herself and her children. There was no accident to be had, and I, personally, am down for that. Let women do wrong. But the show wanted to go a different route, and I was okay with that as well. I'm not picky. What I wasn't okay with, however, was the 10 episode that we got in the first season. Now, some of you might be about to comment that, well, is it really that bad? I mean, Game of Thrones season 1 also only had 10 episodes, and it was one of the most perfect first season of television that there is. And to that, I will say yes. Yes, I agree. But the one thing that Game of Thrones had going for it was that it was a pretty linear story in its first season. We needed to get all the characters on the board in places where they should be before everything goes to hell with the beheading of Eddard Stark and the birth of the dragons. House of the Dragon, because it's spanning several reigns, isn't linear. And what it meant was that unfortunately, due to its 10 episode limit for the first season, and the fact that for whatever reason the showrunners wanted the first season to span 2 reigns and what would essentially be the start of the third, What we got was a rushed plot that was focused merely on getting the characters from point A to point B so that everything could be set for the first salvo that officially launches the Dance of the Dragons. And this is conjecture on my part, of course, but we can guess that the reason that decision was made was because HBO didn't trust the audience. They operated under the mistaken belief that all we wanted were the highlights of events. Jay Harris is old, Jay Harris is losing his mind, Jay Harris needs comfort, Otto sets things up and sends Allison to comfort him. Oh, I'm sorry. That was book information to help us see that Otto Hightower has long been scheming with his daughter as a pawn and eventually a willing participant in his schemes to draw power from the throne because, like all second sons, Otto Hightower feels the responsibility of securing his line, something that few second sons are able to accomplish in that universe. Also, that would, of course, put Alicent as being much older than Rhaenyra. And we don't get that. But what was I saying? Yes. HBO thinks that we want to skip over the plot entirely and simply get to the good part. And the good part being, of course, the start of the civil war between the blacks and the greens. Because with a shorter season, it meant that the writers had to constrict themselves to the story beats that mattered. And if the instructions given was to arrive at the first shot fired that led to the Dance of the Dragon, i.e., Aemon realizing much too late that he has no control over Vhagar, thus leading to Luke's death, which I am not going to lie, was a pretty tension-filled blast to end the first season with. It definitely had audiences in shock, especially those who had no idea what was coming, and still devastated those of us who were expecting it. But was that the right choice, though? The short season meant that if we strip House of the Dragons to its bare bones, it was absence of a lot of plot. Instead, it had destination points that needed to be checked in time in 10 episodes. Jay Harris's reign, his choice of a successor, Aemma's death, the tension between Viserys and Daemon, the attraction between Daemon and Rhaenyra, Viserys appointing Rhaenyra as his heir, Alicent being made to marry Viserys, the birth of Aegon II, the whispers that immediately followed, Rhaenyra being made to choose a husband and the alliances forged and broken as a result, her escapades with Daemon, her escapades with Criston Cole, the rise of the Greens, Rhaenyra being forced to marry Laena, Criston switched sides, Rhaenyra's pregnancies, the rumors about her son's parentage, Arwen's murder, Laena and Daemon and their daughters, Laena's death, Daemon's return, Laena's disappearance, Rhaenyra and Daemon's marriage, the birth of their two sons, the pregnancy of her daughter, Vaemon's challenge of Lucerys' claim to the Driftwood throne, Viserys' death, Aegon II's coronation, Rhaenyra's miscarriage, the shoring of alliances and powers, the death of Lucerys Velaryon. If you just thought, damn, girl, you're still going, that gives you a hint of everything that happened in season 1 that was important to the plot of House of the Dragon. And I even skipped out on some parts too. Yet, everything I just mentioned matters to the story and is important as a setup to the happenings of the Dance of the Dragons that spanned years. Because civil wars are messy, especially more so when it's between siblings both fighting for the throne, as history has shown. And yet none of the plot points I mentioned was given time to actually grow and be carefully explored and examined. And this in turn affected a lot of viewers' understanding of the scale of what they were witnessing on screen. Because if, for example, you have no idea of the politicking that was done when Rhaenyra was first announced as heir, and just how beloved she is with the common folk, you might not immediately clock the reason for the speed and secrecy with which Aegon II had to be crowned, and why he had to be crowned before the small folk to give legitimacy to his reign. It's also the reason why a lot of viewers believe Daemon to be a terrible father, with no idea that he loves his daughters and is why Baelor looks up to him and is so much like him. The short season meant that although the crew filmed the scene where Daemon gets to comfort Baelor and Rhaena upon the death of Laena, The scene itself is cut from the final show to make it tighter. I hate that word when it applies to TV, because it just means that any part of the plot that is considered superfluous is cut out, regardless if it serves the story or the characters. Because with a short season, every scene counts. And that is why I do believe that short seasons turn the pacings of shows from something that can be fully enjoyed into a rushed mess, with a pacing that feels almost frantic. Because you see, when your story is focused on getting across several destination points that you absolutely need to reach in time, there aren't filler episodes to help smooth things over. Now, I'm a big anime fan, which I'm sure you could probably guess by the One Piece manga on my shelves, and the fact that I sometimes make anime content about topics that interest me. And I think that with anime, we can say that filler episodes are terrible. Except, of course, we also collectively agree that not all filler episodes are made the same, and some of them scratch the spots just right. The G8 filler arc for One Piece will always be goated. I know it isn't for everyone, but the Sanpakuto Rebellion arc for Bleach, chef's kiss. And of course, there's the Kakashi Ambu arc. Fillers, when we think of them, are usually thought of as a waste of time, something keeping you from delving into the main story proper. But the way fillers work for anime is different from TV shows. With TV, I think of filler plot points and episodes as transitional words. Now, take a moment with me to flash back to your school days. Don't worry, we won't stay here long, but think back to your school days, specifically when you were made to write essays, and remember what your teacher said about transitional words and phrases. The Touro University Writing Center defines transitional words as bridges between parts of an essay. They are cues that help the reader interpret your ideas. Transitional words or phrases help carry your thoughts forward from one sentence to another and one paragraph to another. Finally, transitional words link sentences and paragraphs together smoothly, so there are no abrupt jumps or breaks between ideas. They are what makes an essay or even books you read flow more seamlessly. And the same applies for TV shows. Those episodes that seem like they've diverged from the main plot of the story are meant to serve as break and pauses to let viewers catch their breath and understand the characters better, yes. But they also help with the pacing of things. So we as viewers get the chance to savor the last bits of information we were hit with, to let us sink into them, debate and analyze what they could possibly mean for the story and the characters, process the ramifications of the event. Treating filler episodes as superfluous often shows that the person in question is more focused on efficiency, which is good in other contexts. But when we are losing ourselves in a good story, our subconscious is rarely concerned about the efficiency of things. Instead, we gravitate towards stories that make us feel, that take us through highs and lows, moments of heightened suspense, and brief lulls to catch our breath, so we can enjoy the ebb and flow of the story being told. A shorter season doesn't give us the room to experience that, because everything is on the clock. The story has to be rushed so the characters can be where they absolutely must be at the end of the season, even if it feels like neither them nor the audience have had time to process the happenings of the full season yet. XO Kitty, which is the spin-off series of the movie adaptation of Jenny Ann's To All the Boys I Loved Before trilogy, had 10 episodes for its first season, which is once again as an introduction into these characters and the stakes for a growing Kitty-san Covey. Makes a lot of sense. But season 2 only had 8 episodes, which created some problems. Because not only did we get a much shorter story, but it also had to be crammed with everything that needed to be explored. Considering the fact that season 1 ended with Kitty realizing that she's bisexual and that Minho likes her. And with season 2 and all the relationship drama, which is a staple for the story, we had to watch Kitty juggle her attraction to Yuri, watch Yuri's relationship with Juliana implode, watch Kitty start a thing with Pravina that didn't go anywhere, the drama with Minho and his dad, Kitty trying to solve her family's mystery and resolve the tension between her grandmother and her aunt, everything that went down with Stella, Dave's family issue, and also him wanting to sing and also getting into a relationship. And of course, there is Q. The thing about ensemble casts is that for you to have everyone on screen, you need to give them something to do, something to want or desire, and conflicts that would ideally keep them from achieving that. All of which takes time. And when you have to rush through it all, the pacing suffers. Now, I enjoyed EXO Kitty season 2. The world and the characters that Jenny Ann created will always have a hold on me. But I'm not going to lie about it. Season 2's pacing, it sucked a lot. And it did a disservice to the story, and I see how that's reflected in viewers' understanding or misunderstanding of the characters. And I see the same thing reflected in Bridgerton season 3. Now, unlike the other shows I've mentioned in this list, Bridgerton didn't cut the number of episodes. It's been a consistent 8 across all 3 seasons so far. But I still believe that 8 seasons is a bit short because, as I mentioned for EXO Kitty, Bridgerton is also a show with an ensemble cast. That's sure, the main romance and protagonists change every season, but some stories, some secondary stories have always run in the background to make the world a bit more lived in. And what we see happen is that the choice to keep expanding on these stories, for example, season 3 turned a bit more attention to the Mondriches, is that more screen time is required, but is insufficient in how it can be shared across all the stories being told and still keep the focus on Pauline for season 3, which made the entire pacing of the season go down in shambles. Till date, everyone is still complaining about the season feeling both too long and too short. Too long in that we were in everybody else's business, and too short in that we spent so much time in everybody else's business that we really didn't get the room to focus on Penelope Featherington and Colin Bridgerton like we were supposed to. And that was a real shame. A real shame indeed. And then there's the fact that shorter seasons limit the experimentation that writers get to do with their stories. Because I don't know how else to say it, but if you're giving the writers 10 episodes to wrap up a story, there isn't room for you to have an episode, for example, where Sam and Dean get to go to a musical rendition of their lives, and Dean complains about Destiel not being Destiel and judges us for our fanfic preferences. The silent stare at the camera, epicness all around. Or Charmed randomly deciding to throw us a Great Gatsby bone with the Pardon My Past episode. The Charmed ones always look extra sexy when they take a dark turn, Alyssa Milano especially. I was living for the clothes, the wigs, the aesthetic. Sure, the lines were cringy, but let's be honest, getting the chance to learn further lore about the Halliwells, giving Prue and Piper different powers for the sake of the episode, and watching Phoebe have to navigate her terrible dating choices yet again, made for a mightily entertaining episode, even if this particular one was never referenced again. Not everything has to serve the main plot. Sometimes getting the room to just play around with ideas is something that serves both the writers and the audience, because we get to have a diversion that still captures our attention, a what if episode which serves to better understand the characters and their choices, and the story and the main plot can resume immediately afterwards. It's a win-win. And finally is the fact that shorter TV seasons are affecting the money and income of the cast and crew, those behind the scenes who bring us these shows. Traditionally, It takes about a week, give or take a couple of extra days, to film an episode of a television show. And considering that the crew are often paid a day rate for each day of filming, that means that the difference between an 8-episode show and a 22-episode show for a crew working on set is almost 4 times what they would otherwise earn. The same goes for actors, who are either paid a daily rate, a weekly rate, or an episodic rate. Meaning the more episodes the show gets, the more money they earn. Doubly so if their show becomes very popular, i.e. the cast of Big Bang Theory, Friends, you get the gist. And of course, this explains why studios would rather have shorter seasons. Because not only is it an increase in their production costs, but they also have to pay the cast and crew more for longer episodes. And they don't want to, because they are all about the money, which means that their go-to solution is to try and convince us that the stories we are getting on TV are better served with shorter seasons. It's not because it's true. It's because it's what serves their bottom line better. Which is why whether it's a big budget production like House of the Dragon or something of a much smaller scale to produce like Exo Kitty, all these shows are getting the same treatment. Shorter seasons every year or every 2 years. Because let's not forget that there's also been an increase in the length between seasons. Now, am I saying that there isn't room for shorter seasons? Of course not. Some stories thrive with them. They work better with a shorter, more concise season for the story being told. Nothing too lengthy so things don't drag in the middle. That's what works best for them. But usually these stories are conceived as much shorter at the start of the ideation process, which is why they do well with shorter seasons. But not every TV show needs to have only 8-10 episodes. Some of them have a bigger cast. Some of them are telling different stories. And even mundane, everyday life type stories need a little room or a little extra episodes to give us that feeling of, yes, the length is just right. But that's just my thought and opinion. What about you? Like this video if you enjoyed it, share it if you want to, comment if you've got something to say or add. Support me on Patreon if you can afford it. And until my next video, do remember, obsessing over the things you love, perfectly valid coping mechanism.